Hello everyone and welcome to another video for Elephant VFX Patreon feed. So today we're going to be talking about grains again, and this was actually suggested by one of the patrons. So I'm very happy that people are sending me messages about things that they would like me to cover. And someone pointed me out to this sequence here from Boba Fett, and I was quite happy because I was a CG supervisor on this show, actually on this very sequence. So here we have a grain simulation. We're gonna see this creature now coming out of the sand, and this was a huge effects task, actually created by Hugo Meda, who was the main visual effects artist working on the simulation. I didn't work on the simulation itself, right? I was a CG soup on the show. And you see this creature coming out of the sand. And what is very nice about this simulation is that there are like three different elements of the simulation. We have the sand itself, which is the main element. Then we have some pebbles and stones, and maybe those are not in the final shot, but we had a version with those. And then there is also dust, right? That is emitting out of the actual sand. So I thought, or whoever sent me this suggestion thought that it was a very nice thing to do. Keep in mind that I'm not an effects DD myself, so this is not my strength. So I created a simple scene that it has nothing to do with this really, but it has the same elements. It has grains, that it would be the sand, or in our case, we're doing soil instead of sand, but it would be the same approach. And then we have also interaction with RBD simulations, which are rocks or stones. And then we have the dust as well. So it's three different FX elements, and they are kind of mimicking the work that was done here. Of course, it's going to be much simpler. This simulation was actually crazy in terms of resolution. There is so many millions of grains here. So again, we're going to try to do a simplified version of this, but hopefully, the whole feeling or the whole approach, it would be something similar. But of course, this is, a Star Wars project, so standards are high. We're doing something a little bit simpler, okay? So what I have prepared for you guys, and by the way, we're gonna be doing everything, right? We're gonna go from the very basics. I'm gonna start by explaining the very basics of grains in vellum using vellum constraints. I'm gonna keep it extremely simple because again, I'm not an FX DD myself, and the way that I approach effects when I have to do effects is the most simplistic way. So I will explain to you the very basics. Then we're gonna be doing a grain simulation, which is going to be the main effect. Then we're going to be doing an RBD simulation for rocks. Then I'll show you how to interact or how to make an interaction between the grains and the RBD simulation. And finally, I'm going to show you also how to emit dust from the grains. So it's going to be three different effects layers here. And at the very end, we're going to take everything here into Solaris. And I will show you how to render this with Karma and with Material X. Okay, so the thing that I have for you is this shot here that I render in low resolution because it takes a while to render in my home computer, especially with the volume renders. But as you can see here, we have a soil ground. It could be sand if you wanted to, but I just decided to make it look like soil. So we have a soil ground, then we have the soil being pushed by this spaceship or drone or whatever you want to call it that I modeled quickly. I couldn't bother about having a creature there and animating a creature. I don't have time for that. So, instead of having a sphere, I have a sphere that looks a little bit cooler than a sphere. So yeah, it's coming out of the ground, it's pushing the soil, and it's creating these very nice clumps. So, and sometimes we have clumps, which maybe they could mimic like wet or compacted soil. And then we have more how's it called? The one that is flowing more a little bit and is not forming clamps, right? So more like if the clamps are kind of like wet soil, the other ones will be more like a dry soil. And then we have the pebbles that are on top and they are bouncing around the spaceship. They are everywhere, really. And I'm going to show you how to do that with a scattering system and then convert that into an RPD simulation that interacts with the rest of the soil and is being kicked by the spaceship as well. And then we have this dust that it forms at the very bottom where when the soil is falling into the ground. So again, very simple, but it's a simple effects, but it looks cool and it's not very hard to make. Actually make it myself, so it couldn't be that hard, right? So yeah, let's take a look at how to do this. It's gonna be hopefully not that long video, maybe less than 3 hours. So let's get into it. So let's start looking into all of this. As I say many times, I'm not an effects artist. I'm not an effects DD by any means. So all the effects that I usually do are very simple, and I try to keep them extremely simple. But at the same time, I want to make things look at least decent. All right, I know they wouldn't be like top-notch effects or anything like that, but at least something that I can do for a personal project that looks okay. So something that happens to me when working with effects, and especially with anything vellum related, is that the simplest that I keep my setups, the better it looks. When I'm starting to introduce a lot of different nodes, a lot of different values here and there, I'm changing things constantly, then it doesn't look that good. So I try to keep everything as simple as possible. So that's what I want to do here. All right. So in my first video about grain simulations, and that is, remember the one that we did with the frozen assets, the assets that we were covering with snow, we were using vellum grains for that, right? So we're going to be using grains again. But honestly, I'm going to try to keep it even simpler than that video, because that video was a little bit complicated, I would say. I think we could have done it in a simpler way. So let's try to do that. So first of all, I'm going to create a rubber toy because I want to show you the only couple of parameters, or well, 2 or 3, that we're going to be using with for this grain simulation. Okay, so let me get rid of that shader, and let me use this as an example. I think it's very important to cover the extremely basics of something before jumping into something a little bit more complex. All right, so at least we know what we're doing. So let me add a transform to this guy, and I'm gonna move it somewhere like here. So just one unit, okay? Basically, I just want to drop this guy, convert it into grains, and kind of explode, right? I don't want to move it higher because, that is computation time that we would require for vellum, and I don't want to do that. So let's keep it like that. Let me get rid of my checker, so everything is a little bit easier to see. All right. So I'm going to add a vellum constraint grains. Actually, we can just do vellum configure grains. And this would be the easiest way of creating grains out of this object in this case. Okay. Well, we need to click on create points from volume. We know this from the other video. And now we have some particles here. We need some kind of collider. So, let's just create a grid. Make sure this is big enough and place it there. And now we should have a collider, right? This grid is big enough. Yes. Okay. So now we have a simple collider. We have a simple vellum object. And if we press play here, obviously nothing happened because we still need a solver. So let's create a vellum solver, pipe it here. All right, great. And this will give us some kind of grain simulation, which doesn't work at all for now, but we're going to make it a little bit better. So the amount of particles that we have here is, is only 800 particles. So let's make that, a little bit high resolution. So I'm gonna go for 0.04, and that gives us way more particles. So we went from 822 particles to almost 17,000. Okay, that should be good enough for this test. We also have jitter scale, right? So this is actually an important parameter because when we enable this guy, it will jitter the scale. So it creates a more random look for this grain simulation, right? Which looks more organic, but this is actually quite slow. So what I would suggest is to enable this always for final simulation, but while you're doing tests, keep it off, okay? Because everything is going to be faster. And especially when you are iterating, when you are trying the first settings, when you don't really know how to make the look of something, it is better to move as fast as possible. Otherwise, you're going to get a little bit frustrated, okay? So let's keep it like without jittering just for now. Okay, so if we come here again and press play, and by the way, let me enable real time. Of course, we need to be looking at the vellum solver. Make sure we reset the simulation, press play. Okay, so this looks better in the sense that we have more resolution in the particles, but as you can see, they are jumping around too much. And that is because the sub-steps, right? We talked about this a little bit in the previous video about grains. So these sub-steps should be at least 10. Anything lower than 10, it will always bounce around too much. So let's keep it like 10, reset the simulation, press play, and let's see what we get. And as you can see, it's obviously way more slower, but now the simulation is more stable. Okay. All right. Let's stop the video here, or the simulation. But as you can see, this is behaving more like sand now, right? Even though we're not doing sand, we're doing soil, but it looks very similar, maybe a little bit more compact, but this is something that we're going to be dealing with a little bit later. But this is looking cool. All right, great. So far, we haven't done much, right? Just the basic stuff, which is particle size, jitter, and sub-steps. All right, that is important. Now, in order to establish the look of this simulation, we need to go to the collisions of the grain. So let's go here to the vellum solver to advance, and here we have grain collisions. So this is going to change radically the look of the simulation. So we have a couple of attributes here, and these are extremely important. We have the repulsion weight, right? And the repulsion weight here basically goes from 0 to 1, and this indicates how many particles will collide with each other. Okay, so when we set this one at 1, all particles will collide with each other. If we set this one at 0, there would be no collision between particles. Okay, so that's important. And that also goes together with the attraction weight. So the attraction weight is how much the particles stick together. right? So if you want something to look dry, you want the particles to stick together. If you want something to look, sorry, the other way around. If you want something to look wet, the particles should stick together, right? Otherwise, they should basically bounce around because they are dry, okay? And this parameter is very, very, very sensitive, okay? Very, very, very sensitive. So you need to play with very low values. So let's keep these two as default, okay? And now we can compare that with something else. So let's add a null here, call this one out. All right, and let's make a copy of this rubber toy. Okay, I'm gonna move this one maybe like, oops, -3. Okay, something like that. All right, so let's go to this one. Let's go back here. And the first one had these two parameters as default, right? So we know what we're gonna get. Let's take a look at that later in a flipbook. Now, I'm gonna set the attraction weight to something slightly different, right? So instead of 0, let's do it 0.05. All right. And now I'm gonna make a copy of this guy. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, and this one I move it 3 units. So move this one 3 units to the other side. And I'm gonna choose something higher, like 0.3. Okay, great. So let's do a flipbook and let's see how this looks. So I'm gonna flipbook this with new settings. I'm gonna flipbook this with HD, and let's start flipping this out. Okay, I'm gonna stop the sim here. I think this is enough to analyze what's going on, right? So again, we are only changing the attraction weight, which again, it's how much the particle stick together. So the first one was 0, meaning that the particles don't stick together at all. The second one was 0.05, so they will stick together a little bit. And the next one was 0.3, so they will stick together way more. So if we take a look at this simulation, right, you see what's happening here. Like in the first one, they are not sticking together, so they are completely dry. So obviously, they just bounce around all the time. The second one, 0.03, they stick together a little bit. And as you can see, they start forming clumps. That's what you get when the particles are wet. And finally, the third one, they are sticking together a lot. So they look very much wet, right? So they stick together a lot. So that is the main parameter that you need to change to control how wet is your simulation, how wet are your grains, all right? So I guess we're gonna go for something more like this one, where some chunks stick together. This one is obviously too much. And this one is definitely not enough for us. So we're gonna get, and again, we can control this with different chunks. We're gonna be doing that later. But we will have parts of the simulation, because right now, everything has the same value, right? So we can have part of the simulation with different values. But this is good just to get an idea of what the attraction weight is doing, all right? Great. Let's take a look now at the other parameter that is very important, which is the repulsion weight. Again, the repulsion weight indicates how many particles will collide with each other. So again, with the value of 1, all the particles will collide with each other. So let's see how that affects the simulation. I'm going to set the attraction weight to the same value for all the simulations. So let's do 0.05, okay? 0.05, 0.05, okay, that's already what we have there, and 0.05, all right? So now they all will create some kind of clamps, like this one here in the middle. But let's change the repulsion weight for the 3 simulations. So this one, I'm gonna set it to 0, all right? Meaning that there would be no collision between particles. This one, I can do something like 0.5, and this one would be 1, all right? So let's see what we get when we do that. I'm gonna flip this, and let's wait for the flipbook. Okay, so here's the flipbook. Let's take a look. There you go. So as you can see, the first one, because there is no collision between them, they don't push each other much, right? The second one, we have a value of 0.5, so some of them are pushing other particles around, and in the third one, all of them are pushing each other. So as you can see, a combination of the repulsion weight and attraction weight is what it creates the look of the particles. So in this case, you know, again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but let's say you're not trying to achieve anything in particular, you're just trying to create something that looks appealing. I think the middle one looks better, right? Because we have a lot of nice interaction. We create clumps, we create bigger tanks, smaller tanks, and some particles move around. So yeah, this is basically the only couple of parameters that I'm changing here for this simulation. So everything that we're going to be doing today is based on this. So again, I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible, so I have less variables to play with. And you know, if I want to change something in my simulation, I know what I need to look at. Okay, that is basically the way that I like to work with effects. And again, just keep in mind that I'm not an effects TD, so of course this is not my main strength, but this is how I like to approach things. Okay, great. So with this introduction, let's jump into the actual. Okay, so this is the scene that I have prepared for you. Again, very simple, but hopefully it will give us, you know, enough to kind of deal with this type of grain simulation. So what I have here is this, I don't know how to call it. I mean, it's kind of like a spaceship, kind of like a drone, huge drone. I mean, this is massive, but this is something that I just quickly model. That looks a little bit sci-fi, a little bit intimidating. I don't know. Basically, I just wanted to do this with a sphere or with a rubber toy. But then I thought, well, let's make something that looks more like a real shot. But of course, I didn't want to spend the time with, you know, modeling a creature or just buying a creature online and then do the rigging, animation, and all that, because that would be too time consuming. So I created a nice looking sphere, I guess. So it's this kind of spaceship. So yeah, let's pretend this is a more complex asset, but at the end of the day, it's just a sphere. But the good thing is, like, it has some protrusions and some details, so that would be nice for playing with the simulation, because if this was just a sphere, it would be a little bit boring. But anyway, it would be the same. So what I have is this geometry here that I model. So basically it looks like that. It has some crappy UVs, but you know, something to create textures. And then I basically scaled this to be something bigger. And then I did some kind of silly animation, and I just have a camera to render this shot. So basically it looks like this. So it's coming from underground and pointing up, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so nothing fancy, but something that kind of works. All right, so yeah, it's coming from underground. It's going to be pushing the soil, you know, the grains, and yeah, they will be falling, and we need to create something that looks decent. All right. And as you can see, I have my timeline set to 120 frames. That's going to be the total of the simulation. And I'm just starting from -10, and this will be the pre-roll. So I would have like a few frames of pre-roll for the grains to settle before the shot starts, which would be at frame 0. All right. Okay, great. So first of all, we need to create our grain source. We can deal with environment later. Okay, we're gonna create some kind of ground, and that would be also covered with soil. That would be more like a look depth task, and then we need to blend the geometry of the ground with the actual grains. So but that's more the rendering side of things. We'll do that at the end. For now, let's just focus on creating the simulation. So we're going to have 3 different items, right? The 3 different elements of this simulation. We're going to have the actual grains. Then we're going to have rocks. Basically, once we have the terrain, I'm going to scatter some rocks, like medium size, like not pebbles, but not like stones, like small stones, like I don't know how big would they be, but 30 to 50 centimeters, something like that. So I want the ship, I want this drone to push around the grains. That would be the main element. But then I want this to push around also those stones, and I want the stones to interact with the grains, right? And finally, we're going to have some dust as well that is coming out of the soil when it's breaking or whatever, and those should be interacting as well with the grains. So it's 3 different layers of effects here, but the most important for now is the grains. So let's go one by one, and let's start working on the grains now. So I'm going to move this camera around, and let's keep it there for now. And what we need to create here first is the grain source, right? So let me create a geometry, and I'm going to call this one grains source. All right, and put this in a backdrop. All right, so this will be our geometry. We would need more stuff there later, and this would be sorry about that. That was my dog going crazy at the postman as usual. But anyway, let's carry on. So our grain source is basically what we're going to be using for sourcing the particles, sourcing the grains, right? So let's go inside, and basically let's just create a grid here. Okay, and this grid is going to be sitting there on the origin of the scene. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So maybe 30 by 30. Let me look at this from the top. We always want the source to be as small as possible, right? Okay, that seems to be covering everything, right? Yeah, that's my sphere, that's my grid. Okay. Okay, that should be good enough. Let me put this flat wire shaded. Okay. Yeah, that should be good enough. All right, great. So this would be our grain source. Let's make it a little bit more irregular, right? Because otherwise it would be just a perfect square made of grains. And keep in mind that, and that will be fine, right? But keep in mind that we need to integrate the environment with the grains. So everything's going to be made of soil. So, it needs to be irregular in order to blend well. Because otherwise we're going to have a straight line here, and it would be very easy to spot where the grains start and where the ground made of soil starts. So we're going to see like a harsh line here. So let's make this a little bit more irregular. So I'm going to increase this resolution quite a lot, something like 200 by 200. And I'm going to remesh it. So it's made of triangles, right? So we go from here to there. So now we have triangles, and basically want to have triangles because I'm going to make a polygon selection. So when we have triangles, we have more to select, basically. So we can make a more organic shape out of this. All right, great. What else? Can we keep this even more more efficient? I think we can, right? Okay, so let me do one thing. I'm gonna make a sphere, and in this case it's very simple because this spaceship looks like a sphere, basically. So I'm gonna make a sphere that is almost the size of this spaceship. So how big would that be? Whoops, maybe 25, maybe less, but let's give it a little bit of margin. I'm gonna make it a little bit better, a little bit bigger. So let's increase this, and let me take a look. So this is bigger than the spaceship, so we have a little bit of margin. Okay, great. Let's reset this. Okay. Yep, that seems to be good to me. All right, so let's make a group here, right? And let's do that. And let's delete these based on points and based on bounding object. There you go. So now we have that. Okay, great. Let me blast it. Basically, I want to create a source that is as efficient as possible, meaning that the smaller it is, the better. So let me choose group 1 here and delete non-selected. All right. And if we take a look at the animation, all right, this is going to be basically our grain source. Okay, that's good. That's good. But again, let's try to make it a little bit more organic, right? Because we still have the issue that this is a very harsh edge. So we can do it manually, I guess, or we can just start adding here some noises. So let me add a mountain. So we have the sphere. Let's make these way bigger, like 3 or something. But then let's make the element size also bigger, like 5, 7, 6, something like that. All right. So now we're creating a group that is a little bit more organic. Okay, that looks a little bit better, actually. Yeah, this looks fine to me. I don't know. Maybe we can add a second layer of noise, something that is a little bit more high frequency. This is quite low frequency, or maybe we're good. I don't know. Let's roll with this and see what happens. Okay. So that's fine. I'm going to poly extrude this because the grain source needs to be thick, right? It needs to be watertight. It needs some kind of thickness. So I'm gonna poly extrude these. Let me go to global, and let's extrude this a little bit. Again, don't go too crazy, right? Because this is gonna give you basically the thickness of the layer that you are going to source from. So if this is too thick, and I don't know if you remember from the other grains video that I made, the one about creating snowy assets, it was quite thick, meaning that we got a lot of coverage. We had rocks, we put snow on top, and because it was quite thick, almost the entirety of the rock was covered by snow. So keep that in mind. And also, you would have to fill these with grains. So the more thickness you have, the more grains you're going to have and the slower your simulation is going to be. So let's keep it, I don't know, 0.8 or something like that. 0.5, 0.8. All right, let's give it a 0.8 for now. And let's make sure that I'm outputting the back. So this is thick and watertight. All right, great. Of course, we might have to reverse this. So the normals are pointing to the right direction. Okay, that is all good. And now I want to subdivide this a little bit to create even more organic shapes. So let me subdivide it by a couple of times, but right now we have a lot of polygons, so this is not doing what I want to do. So maybe we need to break the geometry a little bit. So I'm going to, yeah, let's poly reduce this. I mean, there are other ways of doing it, but you know, basically I want to create dirty geometry. So if I poly reduce this by a lot, I want to keep only 0.5%. Let's see what I get. Okay, this looks quite broken to me, which might be good. So let's divide this now. There you go. This is actually what I wanted to do. All right. So this looks cool to me. I mean, as a geometry, it looks awful, right? But it looks organic, and that's what I want. Because having these shapes, once I convert this into grains, it's going to look even better. But the whole point here is to blend these as well as possible with the rest of the environment. With you know, and currently we don't have an environment, but this is something that we should be watching for, right? We need to blend this with the soil that is around it, that is going to be just geometry with displacement. It's not going to be grain simulation, all right? Of course, you wouldn't have that issue if your grain source was huge, right? So let's look through the camera. Imagine that when we're here, everything is grains. Of course, if everything is grains, who cares? Because it will be, the edges will be out of camera. But imagine how long that would take for you to do the simulation, right? It would be not efficient at all. So by doing this, we're keeping this as small as possible, still interacting fully with the drone or the spaceship or whatever you want to call this sphere. This will be very efficient, but we just need to make sure that it blends well later in the final render. All right, great. Cool. So let's add a null, and I'm gonna call this one grain source geometry. All right, great. So from here we can start working on our grains, right? So let me add a vellum configure grain. Okay, great. I'm going to enable create points from volume. Okay, so this is what we have. We're gonna go lower resolution later, but just for testing, let's just keep it like that. So we have 400, almost like 500,000 particles. For the final resolution, I'm not gonna go crazy either. I'm gonna go to 0.05. This is gonna be my final resolution, which is a little bit over 4 million. But for now, let's keep it like that so we can do our tests, and we're gonna jitter the scale as well. Okay, that looks cool. And let me take a look at the final resolution. As you can see, this is taking way more now. Okay, yeah. This looks pretty good to me. All right, but yeah, let's stick to 0.1 for now. Okay, let's add a vellum constraint here. Vellum constraint, and I'm gonna set the constraint type to glue. Okay, great. Let me add a null here. And basically, I want to take a look at the geometry itself. That would be the geometry, and this would be the constraints. So these are the type of constraints that we have. So depending on, you know, the type of constraint that we have, the simulation is gonna behave in a different way. But we want to use glue in this case. All right. Okay, great. So this would be geo, and this would be constraints. We're going to manipulate this a little bit later. Okay. Cool. Let's display the geometry. All right. So this would be the source. Okay. So let's start working on the actual simulation. I'm gonna color code these as I don't know, whatever color you might think. Actually, let's keep this one like that, and we can color code the simulation and the render, right? Because this is not gonna be rendering. This is just for creating the sim or the source of the sim. Now we need to do the sim, and then we will create another context for render. I always do the same, and if you remember my previous video about grains, I did a very similar approach. Always as simple as possible. Okay, great. So let's create a DOP network here. And this DOP network, I'm going to call grain simulation. It is important to keep things organized because, again, we're going to be simulating 3 different elements here. The grains, the scattered rocks, and the dust. So make sure you follow always the same structure so you don't get lost. All right, great. So here with this DOPNet, let me hide the grain source for a second. Let me save the scene and go inside. And this is naked. There is nothing here, right? It's completely blank. We only have the output. So what do we need? We need a vellum object, okay? We need a vellum source. Okay, let's put this here. We need a vellum solver. And we need a gravity. Okay, so these are the main things that we need. Great. So let's take my vellum object, and I'm going to connect it to the first input of the vellum solver. Here it says object to solve. Great. Then we have our vellum source that I'm going to create, that I'm going to connect here to the post solve. All right. That's all good. Let's pipe the vellum solver to the gravity. This is the only force that that we're going to be using here. What else do we need here? And then this one goes here, right? We need more things, of course. We need the spaceship and we need other elements later. So let's add a merge already here. And that would be the merge. All right, so this is basically the main structure that we need here for the grain simulation. So let's configure each of these. So the vellum source, right? What do we need in the vellum source? Well, we need, let's go here to the subpath. And what do we need here? It's our vellum source, right? This is the source. So let's go to grains source. And that would be the geometry, right? Actually, let me go there, and I want to rename this slightly. So I'm going to call this one out geometry and out constraints. All right, that's better. That's the name that I usually use. So we have an out geometry in there. And then we have a constraint path, and that is obviously the out constraint. Okay, great. That's everything that we need there. What else do we need here? We need some kind of collider, and at the moment we don't have one because we haven't created basically, once I enable the output, because we are sourcing the geometry and the constraints, it will show up here. Again, we need a ground. We don't have a ground yet. We're going to build that environment later. Now we're just testing the grain simulation. So for that, I'm going to just create a ground plane, something that we use temporary. We will replace this later. So I'm going to take this ground plane and I'm going to connect it to the merge. I'm going to set the merge to relationship mutual. Mutual. So it doesn't really matter the order of the elements connected to the merge. And this one, at the moment it's just sitting in the same space as the particle. So I'm going to move it down a little bit. Like something like that. Maybe we need to move it down even a little bit more. Let's see. Yeah, I think this is going to create issues here because it's intersecting. So let's move it down a little bit more. There you go. 0.8, that should be fine. So basically, obviously, these are going to fall down and settle, which is something we don't want to see in camera, but that's why we have a pre-roll. And at the moment, I only have like 10 frames of pre-roll, so we probably need more. But actually, I think I rendered these from the frame 15. This is what I consider the first frame. So, we have a bunch of frames for pre-roll. But obviously, we can go negative 100 if we wanted to. I just wanted to save simulation time. That's why I didn't create a big pre-roll. Okay, this is good. This is good. But what else do we need here? We also need our spaceship to collide with particles, right? So we need to introduce that one here. So basically, I can just create a static object, okay? And this static object will be basically my my collider as well. Not only the ground, but the sphere. The issue here is that we need to create some kind of collision geometry for the spaceship. So let's do that. I'm gonna go here to the spaceship, and we need to create that. You can actually let vellum do that for you. And in the previous video that I have about vellum, the one with the rocks and the snow, I think we did it that way, which is not very efficient, honestly. So I think it's better if I show you how to create your own collision geometry here. Okay, so let's do that. So we need watertight geometry, meaning that we're going to create a VDB out of this geometry. Okay, so I'm going to use for each connected piece, meaning that this is going to create, because here we have actually, if I create a group here and place it here, and by the way, let me just hide that. You see, like I have multiple geometries here. So I would have to create a single, we would have to deal with this individually, right? So the best way of doing that is by using a for loop, right? So again, for each connected piece. So now, whoops, we have this connectivity here that I want to run through primitives. That's all good. Okay, great. And inside, I'm gonna add a fuse to basically connect points that are close to each other. All right. So let's pipe a fuse here. All right. So this is just one of the pieces, right? I'm gonna make this perhaps a little bit less tolerant, 0.1. So if we have something that is very close to each other, that is not that close to each other, it fuses it anyway. This is just in case that some of the geometry is bad, right? Okay. Then, because I know this geometry is not perfect in some places, and there you go. And this is the issue with some of the geometry, that it doesn't have back faces. You know, I made this for a render engine, so I wanted to make it as slightly as possible, as light as possible. So, you know, I don't have interior faces, basically. So we need to fix that. So with a fuse, we will fix that. This piece is actually not the best one to look at, but that's fine. We can take a look at everything later. I'm gonna use a polyfill or polycap, okay? And this should actually fill those things, right? So if we take a look at this, there you go. This has fill with this geometry, the insides, right? So that should be fine. There you go. Okay, so that should give us something that is watertight. Okay. Now let me add a BDB from polygons. There you go. So now we have created a BDB. Okay. The problem when we create a BDB though is that if you take a look at that and that, you know, it's a little bit bigger, right? It's a little bit bigger. If we convert this one back to polygons, if we use let's say a convert BDB, for example, and we say this one is polygons, right? If we compare that one with this one, actually this one is not that bad. It's pretty spot on, actually. So it might not be an issue, okay? But here it is, right? Let me do that again, because maybe it wasn't clear. From here to here, I mean, this one looks pretty good compared with that one, right? But before converting it back to geometry, it looks a little bit bigger, right? Slightly bigger, but and it might not be an issue, but we want to be as accurate as possible. So let's try to fix that, because we need a volume for to be used as collider, right? Because it's more efficient than using geometry. So let's stick to volumes. So basically what I'm going to do here is use a BDB reshape. There you go. And here we can actually erode, right? And that should give us something that is quite good, I hope. Let's see. So we are eroding a little bit. There you go. Yeah, so this looks... Yeah, there you go. This looks pretty spot on. Okay, so let me add a null here. And I'm gonna call this one ship BDB. All right, great. So we have our geometry, and then we have our BDB. Great, and this is gonna be our collider that we're gonna be using in the DOP sim. Okay, great. So let's go back to our grain simulation. we already have this static object here, right? Excuse me, I'm a little bit sick these days, so it's I think I'm coughing too much. All right, so we have this static object, right? So in the SOP path, this is where we connect the actual geometry of the ship. So let's go to ship geometry. This would be, let me hide this guy so we don't have double geometry. Right, so we have the geometry of the ship. The object path, that would be just the root of the ship. Great. Now, in the collision tab here, right, this is where we can actually connect the BDB collider that we just created. So collision, okay, great. RBD solver, collision, where are we? Here. RBD solver, there you go. Use solver default. That's actually not what we want, right? We want to use, is this not changing? What's going on? Oh, sorry. Here in the mode, let's change this one to volume sample. Okay. And here now, we have a proxy volume. So here is where we want to connect our ship BDB. There you go. Okay. And that's basically it, right? This is, we can see it here now in the viewport. That's our collider geometry. All right, we don't need to see that. Okay, great. So now we have a collider. We have a static object, and we have a collider. I think this is everything that we need for now. So we should have a sim working now. One thing though, in this grain simulation here that we have, we don't want to see everything, right? The starting frame is set to -10. That is all good. Okay, actually, you know what? I don't care about this. We're going to be creating another geometry that is going to be called grain render. And here is where we are going to import only the grains, right? Because this one is outputting everything, and of course we don't want to do that, all right? In the ground plane, by the way, I'm gonna just disable proxy geometry, and this might be easier to see. We don't need this now, but later we want to encapsulate everything that we want to render that comes from the grain simulation. Okay, great. Let's play this. I'm going to flipbook this. All right, we have the flipbook here, and as you can see, it is not working. Or it is working actually, but I forgot to do something. And I forgot to bring the animation of the ship. That was my bad, okay? So basically to do that in the static object, you need to enable deforming geometry, right? And now, this is going to think for a second. Let me cancel that. Let me do this. There you go. And now we have the actual simulation in here. And this is basically, sorry about that. Let me basically disable these so we don't have any thing. Wait a minute. This is not working. My bad. I just want to disable. This is not gonna work either, right? No. Yeah, that should work, right? No, because this is inside of a simulation. Anyway, don't worry, because if I move the timeline, this is going to compute anyway. But because this object was animated, we need to use the form geometry. This one was off before, so I just enabled that, and now I should be able to get the flipbook. Okay, so the flipbook is done. It seems quite fast for obvious reasons, right? So if we take a look at this, yeah, it doesn't look great, right? It doesn't look great, but it works. All the elements of this particular simulation are working. So the first frames, the grains are settling down, right? So they fall, they settle there. So that's our pre-roll, right? Till from -10 to 15. That's our pre-roll. And then we get the rest of the simulation colliding with the sphere. But it doesn't look great. It doesn't look great because at the moment we haven't changed any settings. That's where the traction weight and repulsion weight come into play. And also the sub-steps, right? Because now everything is kind of falling around like crazy, right? So let's get rid of that. And by the way, I think we should start looking at the simulation from the camera. Anyway, let's try to fix this. Let's go back here. The first thing that I want to do is what I told you before in the introduction chapter. The vellum solver, when we go to the sub-steps, this should be at least 10. It's going to take longer, but it's going to look much better. So that's the first thing that I want to change. Let me go back to the grain source because this was actually not that bad. I mean, it was super fast to sim. So in my particle size, I'm going to decrease this just a little bit. So I'm going to do 0.08. That gives us a little bit more particles, like 800, less than a million. So it's still going to be quite fast, right? And again, my final sim, I'm only using 0.5, which again, that would give me 4 million. So yeah, it's going to be super fast. Oh, that's great. Okay, cool. So let's go back to 0.8, and that was under a million. Great. So we have changed a couple of things, the particle resolution and the sub-steps. So that alone is going to improve the look of the simulation a little bit. But we still need to decide if this is dry, if this is wet, if this is half dry, half wet. So let's play a little bit with that. So let's go back to the source, sorry. And no, actually, sorry, my bad. Let's go back to the solver. Let's go to advanced and let's go to grain collisions. So the two parameters that I showed you before, attraction weight, again, how much the particles stick to together, right? So when the value is 0, as we've seen before with the rubber toys, they don't stick together at all. They just bounce off each other. So let's increase this. So I'm gonna do something like 0.03. I don't know, let's test that, okay? We might change that later, of course, right? Also, once we have more particles, most likely we would have to change this. But as a starting point, let's keep it like 0.03. And then, or actually, you know what? Sorry. 0.03 is probably not enough. Let's see. I'm thinking of actually doing something a little bit different here. Let me think. Let me think. Well, no, actually 0.03 is gonna be quite a lot. let me think what we did before with the rubber toys, for example. No, I think we used something like 0.3 or 0.05, and that gave us good clamping. So yeah, let's just stick to that. And then the repulsion weight, same thing, right? It's how much the particles collide with each other, right? So all of them will collide with each other. So we want to introduce a little bit of variation. So let's, for now, do something like 0.25, okay? So hopefully this will give us a little bit of clamping. This is soil, so it shouldn't be wet, but we want to create a little bit of clamping, like some particles stick to each other a little bit more, okay? Again, we're going to revisit these settings. I'm just testing for now. All right, so 0.03 for my attraction weight, and 0.25 for my repulsion weight. Remember that the attraction weight is very sensitive, okay? So don't go here because this is going to create a lot of clamping, unless you want to do that. All right, so 0.03. Okay, that's great. What else do we want to change here? I don't want the soil to bounce around much, right? Because it's soil against soil. Like, remember, right now we only have this ground plane here, but later we're going to have like a proper ground. So, shouldn't bounce too much. This is not marbles. This is soil and a little bit of compacted sand. So let's keep it as steady as possible in the simulation. So I'm going to go to the ground plane, and we would have to do this later, right? But any collider would have physical attributes here, right? So the bounciness, I'm going to set this one to 0. I don't want the particles to bounce. And actually, I want to increase the friction quite a lot. And the friction, as you can read there, a value of 0 means that the object is frictionless. So I don't want to do that. I want to have a lot of friction so things stick to each other. So let's do something like 5. All right. And then the ship, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to physical. I'm going to remove the bounciness of that so it doesn't really bounce. But then we want to add also friction. Maybe not as much as the ground, because, in the ground, I want the particles to stay there. I don't want them to move. But in the actual ship, I want them to kind of roll around. So maybe we can use something a little bit higher than 1, but not as high as 5, 2, or 3. Let's try. We need to see this. All right, great. I'm going to save, and I'm going to do another flipbook. Now it's going to take a little bit more because we're using more particles, and we're also using 10 sub-steps for the simulations. Of course, it's going to take a little bit longer, but I'll pause the video here. Okay, the flipbook is done. Now it took way longer than before. I don't know, maybe like 7-8 minutes, something like that. Before it was like a minute and a half. But obviously it makes sense because this is more particles, and we're using bigger sub-steps for the vellum solver. So it is expected, but anyway, this is not that bad. So the final simulation is going to take like 20 minutes or something. So that's fantastic. All right, so let's see what we have here. So again, we have like 25 frames of pre-roll. So basically our shot will start here, frame 15. So the first frames is settling down. So as you can see, this is fine. So now we start the shot, and that's what we get. Okay, cool. Looking good in many ways, but we can still improve it, right? But yeah, I like it. I like that we are getting these clamps, and this is soil, so I like it, right? Because it will be compacted grains of soil, basically. So that looks good. And also something that I really like is the accumulation of things. So that's cool, because we're going to create a floor, or a ground, I should say later, that is going to have a hole, which is basically the hole where, let's say like a tube that goes underground, and that is where this drone or spaceship or whatever is being stored. So it creates this nice circle around it, and it's quite irregular. And once we combine that with the terrain, I think it's going to look cool. So all of that is great. But what we're missing here is that obviously we're using, let's go back to the vellum solver. Let's go to advanced, let's go to grain collision. We're using this repulsion weight and this attraction weight for the entirety of the simulation, right? So we have these clamps that look very nice, but they are everywhere. So what I would like to have here is kind of like a combination of clamps or wet soil and something that is a little bit more fluid, something that, you know, is not compacted, is not clamps everywhere, but we get like, well, like more dry soil, right? But yeah, this is a good start, I think. Yeah. So let's say how we can improve this simulation. Okay. So let me disable this guy. I'm going to enable my grain renders. At the moment, we don't really have anything. So I'm going to create a top import fields. All right. Great. So what is the actual DOP network here? That is basically what we use for rendering, right? So for simulation. So let's go to the DOP network, and that would be our grain sim, okay? And then what do we actually want to import? Well, if we go here and enable this, we're getting the spaceship, we're getting the ground plane, and we're getting the sim. The only thing we care about is the vellum object, right? So this is what we want to render. So let's go back here, and we can either point to that, or we can use vellum. We can use wildcards. So we can type here vellum object, and that should work, right? Or, you know, if you don't want to do that, you can just come here and select the vellum object 1. There you go. Now we need some fields. At the moment we don't have anything, so we just need to click here and it will import it. All right, we don't need to type anything because these are the only fields available here. So that's pretty much everything that we need. Maybe this, we can give it a different color, and this would be maybe blue. All right, and this is the only thing that we're going to be rendering. This and that, we don't care about this. So we're going to bring this back. We're going to bring this into lobs later on for rendering with Karma. Okay, and we want to take a look at the whole rendering side a little bit later. Okay, great. So what is next? So far we haven't improved the sim yet. So let's try to mix dry and wet grains. That was the whole point after looking at this, because again, we're just getting too many clumps everywhere. So let's try to improve that. So in the grain source, let me see what we can do here. Let's mask it out, right? Let's mask the attraction weight, so we can actually remember right now, the attraction weight, which is what creates or is the main responsible for the clamping. The repulsion weight, I'm fine with that. That is, again, how much the particles are pushing each other. The attraction weight is what is making the particles stick to each other and creating the clamping. And right now we have the same value for the whole thing. So let's try to mask that out. So I'm going to create an attribute Bob here. Actually, let's put it here. So that's our geometry, and this would be our attribute Bob. Let's go inside, and inside this attribute Bob, well, let's mask this out with a noise. So let's use a turbo noise. Let's connect it to the position, and to the color, so we can actually see what we're doing here. All right. Maybe there is something else that we can use. Sparse convolution. Yeah, this one looks great, actually. And yeah, let's increase the amplitude so it's very clear what is wet and what is not. And maybe we can make this a bit bigger. Something like that looks fine, I guess. And we're gonna get more detail later once we increase the resolution of the particles, but this looks actually quite nice already. Okay. Let me add, because attraction weight, remember, is a parameter that goes from 0 to 1, right? So let's add a fit range here. So we actually go from 0 to 1. Let's disconnect it from the color, and let's export this to the attraction weight, right? So make sure that you type it correctly. So that should be attraction weight. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's go back to the simulation now. Sorry, not to the simulation, but to the actual. I just wanna because we don't need to do anything in the simulation because the attribute is attraction weight, so it's already mapped to that, right? The parameter is called attraction weight, and because we're binding export the source to the attraction weight, is already hooked into the simulation. But we want to see that happening in the final render, just as a guide for now. So let me add a color here. I'm gonna set this one to ramp from attribute, and I'm gonna use attraction weight. So now we can see it here, right? Let me invert these. All right, and set this one to white. Sorry, I deleted it. There you go. So now what we have here is that the white is going to be wet and the black is going to be dry. So we're creating a lot of clamps that they are going to break anyway, so they are not as big as we can see them here. And the black is going to be more loose grains. So hopefully that will create a nice thing here, right? Cool. I still want to do something to the source. So I'm going to copy this color for now, so I don't need to come back and forward, right? Because if I put this guy here, now I'm able to see this as well. Okay, that's the whole point. Okay, what else can we do? Here? The particles also have a mass, right? Meaning that some weight more than others. And we should have that in different places. But basically you have this mass attribute here. So right now it's the same everywhere. So we can randomize the mass as well. So some, will fall faster than others because they are heavier, and some of them will do the opposite because they are lighter, right? So that's something we can introduce. We can introduce as well. So let's do that based on the IDs of the particles, okay? Not the number, because some of them might die or might disappear, or we might have issues with that. So let's create an ID attribute based on the point number, the number of the grain. If you've seen my videos about BEX, I have, I think, 1 or 2 videos about BEX. We did this many times. So let's do that. Let's create a point wrangler. Let's hook it here, and let's create an ID attribute. So the ID attribute is going to be ID. Let's create an attribute. ID is going to be equal to the number of particles, right? So each particle will get a new ID, and that ID is not going to change ever. So now we can perform something based based on the ID. So if we take a look at the geometry spreadsheet, now we have this ID here. So, we have 800 plus particles, and each of them has its own ID. And as you can see, the mass here is 0.1 for all of them. So that's what we want to change, okay? Based on the ID. So let me just add another point wrangler. Let's add it here. And what we can do here, we can say the attribute mass that already exists, so we just have to invoke it, is going to be equal to something that we can fit between two values, right? So right now we're using 0.1. That was the default, right? Let me ignore that for a second. I think the default is set to 0.1. So let's do, I don't know, I guess we need to try, but let's do a fit of 1. So we're going to fit between a range that we're going to randomize. Again, all of this is simple vecs, and I explain all of this in my video about vecs for artists. So this is going to be a random value based on the ID, meaning that each point that has an ID attribute, which is all of them, it will get a value randomized between a range that I can use here. So the range is going to be, let's say, 0.3 and 3. That is quite big, so that should give us something nice, hopefully. There you go. So now if we go to the geometry spreadsheet, we can see the mass is going from 0.3 all the way to 3. So that will give us nice variation in the mass of all of this. Okay, great. We can disable this color. We don't need it here unless we change something, right? I mean, this color is just here. So if we go here and change whatever in our noise, we can actually see it. But yeah, that looks fine to me. So we can hide that guy. We can enable grain render. And that's everything we need, I think. Well, let's go back to camera. Let's enable the shape. I'm gonna choose smooth shaded, and we can do another flipbook. All right, but hopefully this is everything that we need for the grains. I mean, the only thing that I might want to change, I would say, is the actual noise. If we see that we create too many clumps, then we can introduce more black values or the other way around. All right, but this looks good to me, so I'm just going to flip this, and then we can carry on with the rest. Let's take a look. Okay, great. So the flipbook is done. So let's take a look at how it looks. Nice. Okay, so I'm very happy with this. So as you can see, well, maybe I should have turned the background to black to see it better. But anyway, we can see that all the white stuff in here turns into dry soil, and the black, it's a little bit clumped, right? Meaning that it's wet. So I think this is good, right? I think this gives us a good balance, a good combination. I get these bigger chunks and then smaller chunks, and then all of this is more fluid. I think this looks quite nice. And I think it would be even better once we increase the resolution of the particles. So instead of having, I think now we have roughly 1 million, we're going to have 4 times this amount of particles. We're going to have 4 millions. So that's going to look nice. And that, I wouldn't consider that even like high resolution particle simulation. So let's say instead of 4 millions, if we had here, let's say 18 millions, this would look even much better. But I'm not going to go that crazy. I'm going to go all the way up to 4. And that would be the maximum amount of grains here. But this looks very nice. This looks actually quite cool. Yeah, I'm very happy with this. Great. So let's consider this simulation done. The only thing that I'm gonna do at the end, it is to increase the resolution of the particles and just take a look at the noise. And if if that works, then I'll keep it like this. I don't think we're gonna be changing anything else. Yeah, this looks very nice. Great. So let's minimize this and let's carry on. And by the way, these here, we can disable it. I mean, this is just for viewing the clamps or the different types of grains. But we don't want to keep this color here. We're going to create our own color later for rendering, of course. We could actually expose this as a mask, so we can maybe, I don't know, darken the wet particles a little bit more than the rest. I mean, this is up to you, but we don't need to see this. Okay, great. So let's carry on working. What do we need to do next? Well, we need to create an environment, right? Because now we want to scatter the rocks. We want the rocks to interact with the grains. But in order to place the rocks, of course, we're gonna need some kind of environment, right? Which is just gonna be a ground floor. So let's do that next. So we're not trying to match anything here. We're just creating something from scratch, so we can have as much freedom as we want, right? So let's create another geometry context here, and this is going to be, let's hide the grains for now. This is going to be the ground. Okay, so let's call that ground, and then we can build here something. So, I mean, let's use a height fill. Why not? Maybe this is too big. Yeah, that's definitely too big. So maybe we can make this smaller, something like that. Let's look through the camera. All right, that's probably good enough. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, okay. I mean, we can make it a little bit bigger if you want, but this should be fine. All right, so we have that. How many boxes do we have here? 100. So let's create more resolution there. Let's move maybe 0.5. So we have 400. Maybe we can get even more. So that gives us 1,000 boxes. Okay, that should be probably enough. All right, let's noise this up a little bit. So I'm gonna use a height fill noise. All right, that's definitely too big. So maybe let's do something like that. I think this is probably too much, isn't it? Yeah. 10. 5. Let's take a look here. I'm gonna get rid of the grid. Okay, this seems fine to me. So we have a little bit of bumpiness. It's a little bit irregular. That's what I want, right? We're not creating mountains or anything. We're just creating a ground. Okay, that's good. Is this big enough? I mean, here we can see the end of this, so maybe we can use a height fill transform and make it a little bit bigger, like 5 or 10. Okay, so now we get a little bit more lower frequency there. Okay, that's okay, I guess. All right, yeah, that seems good. Let's do perhaps, actually, you know what? I think we don't need it to be that big. I think we can make it a little bit bigger than this, but I just want to make it. So let me check one thing. When we create a height fill, it's this big, okay? So yeah, that's pretty much okay. Let's do that. Yeah, because the thing is, I want to run a little bit of noise. Oh, sorry, a little bit of erosion here. So if I do a high field erosion with this, it's not gonna look very nice. Let me remove this. Freeze at frame 20. So let it run a little bit. Okay, it takes a few seconds. There you go. And as you can see, this doesn't look very nice. And the reason being that we're running this over a very small surface. So let's make it big, run it again. And that should look better. And then we can resize it back. Because, you know, height fields are supposed to be big elements like mountains and whatnot. So if you're doing something like a ground, it is better to still work with a big surface, but then resize it down, right? So there you go. This looks much better, right? Yeah, this looks fine to me. Okay. But yeah, basically this node here, it's taking our small height field to a big height field to be able to erode it properly, and then we can scale it down. So if we do another height field transform, if we do something like this here, and then we scale it down, something like that, there you go. Now things work a little bit better, right? So that's just a small trick that when working with the small height fields, it's better to do the erosion based on the big one and then rescale it down. So yeah, here it was too small. Here it got bigger. We did erosion and then we scale it back. All right. So that, I think that looks fine. You know, I mean, this looks a little bit artificial, but that's fine because we're going to break all of that with some displacements later in look depth. So we should be good, I think. Okay. Let me do a height field convert. So we generate a geometry. So now we have 1 million points here, which is fine. Okay. And something that, yeah, this is maybe we want to have something a little bit closer to the ship. Okay, so let's move it down. So maybe, yeah, let's transform it down a little bit. Yeah, because also, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the grains. Yeah, there you go. So this ground needs to be obviously below the grains, not on top. So let's move this one to something like that. That is definitely not, that's too much. -2, that's still too much. -1 perhaps. Okay, so let's do file cache. Okay, and let's save this. We only need a single frame. This is not simulation, it's not that time dependent, and I'm gonna say explicit here, and let's save that. All right, let me copy that. Cool. So basically, now we can read this thing here. There you go. Okay. Now we have this thing here. Let's go to our camera again. Why is this thing up in the air? Let me check if I made a mistake somewhere. Grain source, there you go. Did I move something? I think I moved something, sorry. Let me double check. No, I think it's fine. Okay, never mind. We can just move the thing a little bit up. So let's take the ground. Let's add a transform here. That's probably because I made the noise center instead of maximum, but that's all good. We can basically move this up a little bit. So let's take a look at the camera. Let's make this a little bit bigger. There you go. All right. 10, 15, that's too much. You know what? It's hard to see this, so let me enable the color again so I can see things a little bit better. There you go. All right, so this is, can we push this a little bit more? 14.5, 14.8, something like that. There you go. Okay, so there is a gap, right? Which is fine. That's why we have a pre-roll. So this will fall and will stabilize the simulation. And then let me hide this for a second. And then the ship will come in. Okay. Great. So let's do one more thing here. So this would be what we're going to be using for simulation. So let's set this one to out sim. Okay, great. So we're going to be using this for simulating both the grains and also the rocks, right? That we're going to scatter. But what else do we need? We need something for rendering. And for rendering, I want to make a hole here because we're going to have the shape coming out of the hole. So let me create a sphere. Okay. And this sphere, I want it to be as big as the spaceship. So maybe something, well, slightly bigger, something like that. Let me give it more resolution. Okay. Now, let me create a Boolean. And this Boolean is going to get the ground and the sphere. Okay. But this first input is not a solid, it is a surface, right? Because it's a single geometry. So let's set that one to surface and this one to subtract. And that should do it. Takes a couple of seconds there. There you go. So now we have a hole. That's good. Let's take a look through the camera. And now we get this. Is that big enough? Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, reasonably big. All right. We can make it a little bit bigger if we want to. All right, that's good. Then what else do I want? Now I want the actual hole because I want to make a tunnel. I don't think it's going to be very visible though because it's going to be dark and it's going to be covered with sand and everything or soil. But anyway, let's make it anyway. Let me just duplicate this Boolean. Okay. Let's put it up here so it's a little bit easier to understand. Oh, come on. There you go. So this one goes here. And now let's create a group out of this. I just need the edge. Oh, sorry. This one I want it to be intersection. There you go. So now we only get the actual hole. I'm gonna make a group. This group, I want it to be edges. There you go. And I'm gonna click on include by edges and share edges. So now I only get the border. Okay, great. Now let's add a poly extrude. There you go. Cool. This poly extrude, let's use that group that we created. So that would be group 1. Let's go to transform and let's extrude this down. Something like that. In global. There you go. There you go. So now we have some kind of a tunnel. Great. Let's make another group here and let's do a selection. And I just want to keep this stuff. Okay, great. And let's blast. Oops. Blast that group. Delete non-selected. And there you go. And now we have some kind of tunnel there. Okay, great. Let's remesh it. Let's do something like that and see how it looks. Okay, let me check the wireframe. All right, that should do. All right, great. So let's noisy this up a little bit. Let's add some kind of a mountain. Maybe we make this a little bit bigger. Like that. Okay, yeah, that looks like some kind of tunnel, right? Okay, let's see how it looks combined with the rest. So I'm gonna add a merge, connect this, sorry, not that, but this and that. Okay, that looks cool. Obviously it's too close to the edge, so let's make it a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna move it down a little bit, 0.5, 0.4, something like that. And now I can scale this a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Okay, let's see how that looks from the camera. I don't care about the rest. Okay, is that good enough? I think that gap doesn't help, so maybe we don't scale this in Y. There you go, that looks better. Okay, so that looks good. I mean, we could make the edge a little bit better, but honestly speaking, we're not gonna see it, right? We're gonna have accumulation of soil around it. So I think that's good, right? Let me get rid of that. Smooth shaded. I mean, yeah, this looks fine. All right, we can make it a little bit bigger if you wanted to, but again, I think this will be fine. Okay, great. Good. No, so now we have some kind of ground here. What else do we need? Let's go back here. Let's get rid of that. We don't need that merge. So this is for the simulation. Okay. Then this would be for rendering. So we can call this one out render, and we can put another one here. And this would be out tunnel, right? So, well, actually we could combine these two, but I don't know, maybe I need to use different materials for this one and that one. So I'm gonna keep them separated. So then I can treat them separately, separated in lobes. Okay, that's my whole idea behind this. What else do we need? Well, we need to scatter rocks here, but right now this is too big. So let's make a camera frustrum, so we don't scatter on everything, but only in the sections where the camera sees all of this. So let me hide the spaceship for a second, go back here. Right, so this is the full animation, great. So let's make a camera frustrum. Let's make a camera frustrum here. So I'm gonna create a box, okay, great. And I'm gonna add a point wrangler here. I've shown you how to create camera frustrums before, and I think I've shown you, I don't know, like a couple of different ways of doing it. I don't know if this is something that I covered in the past or not, but anyway, it's just another method of doing camera frustrum. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say the position is equal to from NDC. Okay. So basically, let me take this here. If I say Houdini Bex from NDC, this is a Bex function that transforms the vector from an NDC space to current space. So this is gonna take a world position into the of an object into a local position of another one. This is something that I also cover in the Bex videos, so take a look at those if you are interested. But here, let's just create this. So I'm gonna say from NDC, and what I want to use is, oops, what's the language of my thing? Is it in Swedish? Yes. Okay, there you go. From NDC parentheses, and I'm gonna point to my camera. So my camera is in quotation marks, and this is the path. So that is OBJ camera 1, all right, quotation marks, there you go. And I want to grab the position. So that should be at position. There you go. I think I put a dot instead of a comma. Sorry, I'm always confused with the keyboard, because this keyboard is in Swedish. Where is the comma here? There. Okay, great. There you go. So now we have this thing working with the camera. All right, but I need to move this to the beginning. So so I'm gonna get the box center to be 0.5 and 0.5. There you go. So now it's in the origin, and now this should start from the origin, right? But let's make it bigger, of course. So let me go to size and make it like 100 or 200, something like that. Okay, this seems fine, but we need to fix the set axis. So, we can just move it there, and that's pretty much the camera frustrum. We can basically also grab, if we want to make this a little bit more procedural, we can basically say the inverse of this, right? So we can copy this parameter, and we can say here, we can say paste relative reference of no, wait a minute. We can copy this size, and we can do half of that, right? So we can say here paste relative references. Okay, so that's basically that, but it needs to be inverted. So we can say minus, there you go. And now by half. So at the end, we can say here, like that, there you go. And now that should be procedural, meaning that when we change this guy, this should work automatically. Okay, that's fine. Now, is that enough to cover everything? So let's take a look at that. Yeah, right. Actually, we could go 100, 150, something like that. Well, now it doesn't matter because we're outside already. So let's keep it safe. Okay, that is good. That is good. So, you know, this is obviously animated because it's attached to the camera. So that's all good, right? But let's make sure that we have some margin because obviously we see more at the end than the beginning. So let's make sure that we have enough information there. So what we can do here, we can add a trail. There you go. And the train length, let's see, there you go. So as you can see, it's creating a trail of 10 things, one on top of each other. Maybe we can increment the trail here by 10. There you go. So now it's easier to see. Maybe we need more, 30. Is that enough? I guess it is. So basically, this will give me a little bit of margin. All right. Otherwise, we might be missing something. Maybe not, but just to play it safe. All right. So we care about the last frame because in the last frame is where we see more. The field of view is bigger. So let's add a time shift to the last frame. Let me delete channels so it sticks to 120. There you go. So that's all working. Great. Let's convert this to BDB. BDB from polygons. Okay, these, sorry, let me cancel that because we don't need a big resolution here. So let me set that one to 1. There you go. So we just want something low res like that. And let's explode it a little bit. Let's use a BDB reshape, same node that we used before, but now instead of erosion, we're going to use dilate. So it makes it a little bit bigger. So we still have more margin. Okay, that should cover everything up. Okay, great. Let's create a group. And now let's take this guy, set the group to be points. Let's connect that one there. There you go. And let's use keep in bounding regions and use a volume. There you go. So that is our camera frustum now. And if we take a look through the camera, everything should be covered, right? Okay, great. So now we can blast this thing. We can blast the group 3, invert selection. There you go. And that's all we need for scattering, right? Actually, we could use this for rendering also, but you know, it's not a big deal. So let's output this, and this would be out scatter. All right. So we scatter only in this area instead of. So I just imported this thing here. I didn't want to bother you with that. But basically, this thing is called, I just created this libraries thing here. I don't think I'm going to use any other libraries. But anyway, let me hide this for a second. So I have these rocks. So if we take a look there, these are just 3 Megascan rocks that I downloaded from Quixel. So yeah, basically 1, 2, and 3 different rocks, right? That's how they look. So the only thing that I've done to them is basically import them, resize them to Houdini scale, and use a match size set to minimum so they sit right in the origin of the scene. It's only 3 rocks that I'm going to be scattering. That should be plenty, I think. Okay, great. So let me create another geometry here, and I'm going to call this one rocks scatter. Great, let's go inside and let's do an object merge. And this is the geometry where we want to scatter the rocks, which is basically this thing that we created here, the out scatter. So I'm going to copy that and paste that path here. And there it is. I'm going to hide the grid for a second. Okay, let's bring the rocks. So I'm going to do another object merge. I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to my where are these rocks, rock 1 out. So this would be my rock 1. I'm going to add a color so I can see it. This is just for the viewport, not for rendering. So that's my rock, and I need to add an attribute here because we want to scatter the 3 of them with a copy to points. So each of them need an identifier, right? So let me add an attribute create. I'm going to call this attribute something like rock, and I'm going to give it a value, and the value is going to be 0. And then I will do the other one with a value of 1 and a value of 2. And yeah, that's pretty much what I need. I don't think I need anything else. So let me duplicate this, and this would be rock 2. I'm going to change the color to green, and the value is going to be 1. There you go. And finally, the last rock. That would be rock 3. The color is going to be blue, and this value is going to be 2. Okay, that's all. Now, for the scattering, we have this whole surface, and of course we want to, we don't want to scatter in absolutely everywhere, even though we could, right? Because I can do a scatter here, and now as you can see, we're scattering all these points in there, right? So, and by the way, in the scatter, I always use density. So let me set this one to manual for a second. I'm gonna set this one to 1 and go back here. All right, so that many points. Okay, that's all good. I'm gonna create an attribute bob to create my distribution mask. That's what I wanna do here. So let's go inside, let's disable the points. And let me use a turbo noise, which for whatever reason I like using lately. I'm gonna connect this one to the position, this one to the color, so we can see what it does. Okay, let's do something different. Maybe change this to sparse convolution. There you go. All right, let's make it black and white. There you go. And maybe we need to make this a little bit bigger, right? So something like 0.5. There you go. That looks a little bit better. Maybe even bigger. 0.3. All right. And maybe we can play a little bit with the offset. Okay, that looks good. Let's look at that from the camera. Yeah, that might work. Okay, let's export this attribute. Bind export, and let's call it density. So now we have some kind of attribute for the scatter. So now we can use the density attribute here, and that's how it looks. Let's take a look from the camera. Let's see the points. All right, so we have some pockets that are free of rocks and others have a little bit more rocks. Maybe let's do something like that so they get a little bit more clamped with the relaxed iterations, right? Yeah, that looks better, I think. Maybe too many too little, too few, I don't know. Let's take a look once we copy the geometry. Okay, so what else do we need here? So that attribute that we created, right? We need to assign it to the points as well. So let me add an attribute at just integer. There you go. And how do we call this here? Rock. Okay, so we need to use the attribute name rock. Okay. Running over points, that's good. The pattern type, let's set this one to be completely random. And we have 3 rocks, right? So this is 0, 1, and 2. So let's set this one to 0, 2, 2. And I think that's everything we need. So if we take a look at the points, we should have an attribute rock going from 0 to 2. That's all we need. Now we can use a copy to points. Okay, let's enable pack and instance. The piece attribute is called rocks. No, sorry, rock. No, in singular. There you go. Now we can combine all these guys in here. All right, there you go. Now we pipe this one into the copied points, this one here, and that's what we get. All right, we get all these rocks. Okay, right. Let's do a little bit of variation in them in terms of rotation, scale, and all of that. Let's call this one out rocks. And to do that, there are many ways of doing that. But I created with you guys a long time ago some scattering HDAs. So let's use those. Why not? That's probably the fastest way of doing it. So after the scatter, I'm going to use a scatter random rotation. There you go. And this one will rotate. There you go. This one will create random rotation between 0 and 360, right? So before they were all facing the same direction, as you can see there, and now we have a little bit of rotation. So that's good. And let's add a scatter random scale. There you go. And let's play a little bit with the scale. This is probably better done through the camera. So let's make them a little bit bigger in general, I think like 2 or something, but let's do something like that. Maybe a bit bigger, something like that. Okay, I actually want to take a look at this with the context of the ship. There you go. So okay, these look good. They are not too tiny, they are not too big. And yeah, I mean, by pure chance, there are a few of them right on top of the ship, which is great because then the ship will kick them around, right? They will push them. And some of these around here, they will interact also with the grains. I mean, all of the ones on top of the ship will interact with the grains on the ship. The ones on the side, maybe they get pushed a little bit by the grains. Okay, that looks quite good to me. Let's take a look at the ground as well. The ground render, which is this guy, right? Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And I know that, you know, there is a hole here where the ship is coming out, but of course there would be grains here. I mean, I know this looks a little bit weird now because there is a hole and it's like, what the hell are these rocks doing here if there is nowhere to sit? But the grains would be here. So of course it will make sense later. So maybe to not get confused, maybe we just take a look at this. Maybe that makes more sense. Okay, so that is working. Okay, so I guess it is time now to start working on the actual RBD simulation for all of this. So let's hide. Let's hide everything for now, and let's make a little bit more room in on the FX side here. And let's create another DOP network. Okay, so we have one that takes care of the grains, another one that will take care of the rocks. So I'm gonna call this one rocks sim. Great, let's go inside. We only have the output. So what do we need here? Well, we need an RBD packed object, which is going to be the the rocks, right? We need a rigid body solver, right? Let's connect everything as it should. We need some kind of gravity as well, so let's connect that one there. We need a merge, and for the merge, what do we need? Well, we need the terrain, and we need the spaceship, right? So let's pipe that one there, set this one to mutual. Okay, let's create a terrain object, and this terrain object, the subpath is our ground. Where is our ground? Ground out sim. There you go. And the OBJ level, it's basically just the ground. Ground. There you go. Okay. This one goes there. Okay. What else do we need? We need a static object. Let's call it ship if you want. And same thing. So we go to the subpath, and we need to select our ship geometry, and our ship. There you go. And let's pipe that one there. In the ship, same thing as we did before. Remember to enable deforming geometry, otherwise the animation wouldn't work. Let's go to collisions. Let's set this one to a volume sample. And then let's look at the proxy volume, which is the BDB that we created before for the grain simulation. So that would be ship BDB. There you go. Okay. What else do we need here? If we go to bullet data, let's go to, because these rocks, let me think. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much everything we need, right? Do we need to do something to the to bullet? Maybe, because yeah, we want to use the convex whole per connected primitives. I think that's what we want to do. Well, let's take a look, because I'm not 100% sure. Let me yeah, here, let me for a second disconnect this guy. So on the ship, if we hide the geometry, but we displayed this, yeah, there you go. That's basically what we're getting here. Yeah, so we want to get more precise collisions, right? So by default, this one is off. So we'll create this, which is fine for the grains, but for RBD, which is cheaper to simulate, I want to use a convex hull. So we get a little bit better representation of the geometry, okay? So we don't need that, and we can display the geometry, put that there, make sure this one is mutual. That's all good. Okay, so we're good. We're all good. So what else do I want to do here? On the terrain, same thing as we did before. I'm going to set the bounds to 0 and the friction to 2. That's exactly the same thing that I used before. No, I think I used 5 on the terrain. It doesn't really matter, but just to stay consistent, I'm going to use also 5. And on the ship, I think we use 0 and 2 before, so I'm gonna use the same. Okay. Okay, is that everything? No, we haven't configured the rocks, right? So the RPD packed object, I'm gonna go to the subpath, and I'm gonna point to the rocks. So that would be rocks scatter out rocks. There you go. Good. And that should be it. Okay, so let me enable let me just, no, I don't need to enable the ship because the ship is here. So we can see everything if I do a flipbook here. So let me do a flipbook and see what we get. Okay, so this is the flipbook. Let's take a look. And yeah, that's how it looks, which looks fine to me. I mean, we have a couple of frames here where the simulation is settling down, but that's fine. That's our pre-roll. And then the rest looks just fine. I mean, things are rolling over. Maybe we can decrease because, you know, we have a little bit of margin here. Maybe, I think it's going to look fine anyway, because we're going to have a layer of sand or grains in the middle. So it should be fine. But if you want to change this little margin, so it's even closer to the surface, something you can do is you can go here to the rocks. You can go to bullet data, and you can reduce the collision padding even more. That's the default value. But I'm happy with this. So I'm just going to keep it, right? I don't need to simulate this again. And this is super fast to sim anyway. Okay. So let's make a context for rendering those things. So I'm going to create a geometry here. I'm going to call this one rocks render. Go inside dop import fields. Okay. And now this one, I want to point to the rock seam. There you go, rock seam here. And what I want to bring is the packed, what's the name of this? RPD pack object. There you go. Create a field, and this is now imported. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add a file cache. Okay. I'm going to call this one rocks simulation. And that's pretty much everything. I'm going to set this one to explicit, and it's going to write it there. That's all good. So let's save to disk. All right, so now we're reading this from disk. Great, things are working just fine. Let's add a null out. There you go. So what is next? Next is to make the interaction between the grain simulation and the grain simulation and these rocks, right? So a combination of RBD simulation and grains. So let's do that next. All right, so let's go back here to rocks render, and this is packed geometry. So we cannot use packed geometry to interact with grains. So we need to unpack it. That is kind of like the first thing that we have to do. So I'm going to unpack this, and you go. So now this is live geometry. It's a little bit slow at the moment, obviously, but let it compute. Still doing it? Yes. There you go. Now we have it live. Let's see how many polygons we have here. 10 million polygons. So of course it's going to be a little bit slow. But no problem. Next, we need to create some kind of volume out of this because it's more efficient, right? So let's do a PDB from polygons. And again, let's put that one there and see how this looks. Might take a couple of minutes to compute. There you go. So this is obviously not good enough. So we need better resolution, even though it's going to take more, but then we're going to cache it anyway. So 0.03, let's do that. Okay, and this looks a little bit better. Okay, let's take a look. This and that. Yeah, we're getting that issue that things are getting a little bit more chunky. So we can do the same thing that we did before. We can do a BDB reshape and set this one to erode. And that should look much better. I mean, we don't need a, crazy precision here, but something that is kind of close. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now let's cache these. This is not a simulation. Let me use explicit and let's call this one rocks PDB collider. And let me cache this out and we can come back in a second. Okay, so I cached this thing as a PDB. It took a while because it's 120 frames. And I just put a out rock collider null here. And basically, this is what we get. So same thing as before, but now we have PDBs here that we can use in our grain simulation. All right, so now we're ready to use these in the grain simulation. Okay, so this out here is gonna be for rendering, and this one here is gonna be for collision. Okay, great. So let's hide for a second this rock render, save the scene. And now we need to go back to our grain simulation. So in our grain simulation, now we need to integrate all of that, right? First of all, I'm gonna get because I'm just realizing of something here. Anyway, I'm gonna create a static object, and this will be the rocks. So let's call that one rocks and pipe it here. Okay. And I'm gonna go to my path, and that should be rocks scatter, no, sorry, rocks render out. Let's see if that updates. Okay, that's good. And my obj path, that should be my rocks render. Okay, great. Now I'm gonna go to collisions, and I'm gonna go to set this one to volume collisions, set this one to volume sample, and in my proxy volume, I'm going to select my rocks collider. There you go. All right. And of course, before I forget, enable deforming geometry. Okay, so now we get the animation from these guys. If we click on disable geometry and in collisions in bullet data, we click here, we should be able, whoops, what's going on here? Let me see. These are my rocks. Volume sample, volume collision, rocks collider. Okay, that's all good. This should be picking up. Oh, sorry, my bad. There you go. Let's see if we can see it. All right, it will take a couple of minutes to compute. I just want to show you that the collisions are actually working, but they should. Okay, it took a minute to load, but here you can see it. So basically the collisions are working. Let's disable that. I think that's everything that we need, right? Let me think if we are missing something. Well, not really. Oh, actually, yes. Sorry, I'm stupid. This ground plane, right? This is not what we want to use as a ground plane. We want to use, of course, the ground that we created. So let me create another static object, because we have the ship, we have the rocks, and now we need the ground, right? So let's just duplicate this guy. Oh, actually no, sorry. Static object, and this should be the ground. So let's go to the ground seam, right? And let's set the path to the OBJ level. There you go. Okay, great. Let's use the same values that we had before. I think here we were using 0 and 5. So let's use the same thing. 0 and friction of 5. And that's probably it. So let's go to collision, display geometry. Sorry, here. Collision. I think I made a mistake. I changed this here. Sorry. I want to keep the rocks as default with a little bit of bounciness, and here this is the ground. I didn't mess up here, right? Rocks, ground. No, okay. So let's set this one to 0 and let's set that one to 5. And then for collisions, so basically, let me hide everything. Okay. That's geometry. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so it's going to be using the solver default, which is all good. Oh, this is important because this is concave, right? So we need to set that one to be concave. So let's go to bullet and set this one to concave. Let's see if we can see. There you go. So this would be our collision geometry, which is more expensive because it's concave. Otherwise, it would be just kind of flat. So we want to have all the details of the terrain. Okay, I think now we're good. We can get rid of this, so just keep it over there. Okay, so that should work. Let me reset the simulation. So we have the grain simulation, we have the rock simulation, so we can enable that one, enable the ground, enable the shape. And I think this is everything we need for rendering, right? I think so. Let me go here. I just want to play a few frames to see that everything works. And then we can carry on. Okay, I only cached a few frames just to check that things are working. They seem to be working, right? I can see that the grains are interacting with these stones here in the foreground. So that's fine. I mean, this takes quite a long time. Even when it's cached, just to do the flipbook, it will take I don't know how long it would take, but it would take a while. So I don't want to waste time with that. I can see that things are interacting with each other, so I'm good. All right. So what I want to do now is actually cache the high resolution simulation. So I'm going to go to my grains simulation. Sorry, not my grain simulation, my grain source. And I'm going to decrease my particle size to 0.05. So we have higher resolution particles. Okay, great. So now we have almost 4 million particles, which is not super high res, but I don't have a render farm here, so it will take a little while to do the simulation. Okay, that's great. Now, in my grains render, in my grains simulation, in my vellum solver, I'm actually going to increase the attraction weight a little bit more. So instead of 0.03, I'm going to go to 0.05. This is because I want to get a little bit more clumping. Okay, so that's what I want, and that's everything really. So now in my grains render, I'm going to add a file cache. Okay, I'm going to call this one sim and set this one to explicit. This is just a personal preference anyway. And I'm going to cache this. Okay, so I will see you in a few minutes. Okay, so this is the cache. I just did a flipbook and I basically removed the pre-roll. So as you can see, we're starting from frame 15. So this is basically how it looks. So this is the high resolution particle simulation with the new clamping that I did from 0.03 to 0.05 and interaction of the grains together with the stones. So it's looking good. Okay, great. I'm quite happy with this. So I think I'm going to move forward. So the last element that I need to simulate now is the smoke. And the smoke, it's just residual smoke that happens after the friction of the soil. So it's not a huge effect. It's going to be very subtle in the render. So I'm going to do also like a very simple and low res smoke that could look much, much better. But again, it's not a huge element of the simulation. So I don't want to spend a lot of time with that. So yeah, basically let's do that now. So I'm gonna save this and we can continue with the smoke. Okay, smoke or dust, I should say. Let's try to keep it as simple as possible. So I'm gonna create another geometry here and let's hide everything that we don't need in the viewport. Let's hide rocks and the grains. Okay, we cached or I cached the grains with this color thing here, which I mean, I don't care. I mean, we can get rid of that color later, and we will. But yeah, maybe you don't want to do that. That doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna call this one dust source. So as you can see, we're always doing the same. So we have the source, the sim, and the render. Well, in this case, we don't have a source because we are basically creating the thing here. Maybe we can call this source, and the sim and the render, and now it's the same thing. So what is the source of the dust simulation? Well, it's going to be the grains, right? So maybe grains render. Let's create a null here just to keep it tidy. Let's pipe it here. And this is going to be out dust. We can do that. So let's go to the dust source. Let's do an object merge and let's paste it here. And maybe I'm going to add a color so we don't have that weird theme being transferred to the dust. So we're going to emit from here, right? And again, this is cached, so it should, even though it's heavy, it should kind of work quite well, and it does, right? Okay, so what I want to do is, well, first of all, this is just too many points in order to emit dust from them. So I'm going to remove a lot of points. And also I'm going to remove the points where there is no velocity, right? Because if we go here and we go here, we have velocity. Right now the velocity is 0 because this is not moving, obviously. If we go to a different frame, we have velocity, right? So let's emit only dust from points that are moving. When they are static, when they don't move, we don't want to emit dust from them. So we can do that with a little bit of a little bit of X. So let's do a point wrangler. And here we can do something like if the length, let's put that there, length based on the attribute velocity, is less than whatever value. So I'm going to create a channel float for that I can call something like velocity scale, something like that. So if the value is less than something that I put in there, let's remove the point. Remove point. And I want to remove the first input based on a PT number. And, right, there you go. And close this whole thing here. Okay, what did I type wrong? If length at velocity is less than channel float velocity scale. Oh, I'm missing a parenthesis here, sorry. There you go. Nice, good. Now we need to create that value. And what that value should be. So 0, obviously. So if we set this one to 1, it's going to remove everything. So let's do something in between, 0.5. So at the moment, there is no smoke because in this frame, all the particles are, they have a velocity of 0. So if I move here, now we're emitting dust from there and from here and from there. That's still too many points, in my opinion. So let's do one thing here also. Let's do a switch. And we don't want to activate this whole thing in the first few frames because we have pre-roll. We don't care about the pre-roll. So maybe create a null here. And we can say here $frame less or equal than 15. So the first 15 frames, this is basically doing nothing because it's pointing to the null. And after frame 15, this is gonna kick this thing and the dust will start showing up. Okay, so let's go to one of these frames. There you go. And again, I was saying there were too many points. So let's add another point wrangler. Because we don't want to emit from every single point, right? So let's say if a random value based on PT number, right? Based on PT number, and that random value is going to be a channel float that we're going to create that we can call something like threshold. Let's call it threshold. Let's close this and let's open. And if statement, we can say remove point, same thing as before, right? From input 0 at PT number. There you go. Okay, and let's close the statement. All right, didn't make any typos now. Let's do that, and let's remove quite a lot. Half of them. Okay, more. 90% of them, maybe less, 80% of them. All right, so now we are using these points to emit dust. Okay, great. What else do we need? There are a lot of attributes here. We don't need any of those. So let's add an attribute delete and let's remove everything, actually, except the velocity. Right? We need the velocity. So keep the velocity there. So now this is gonna be faster to cache and everything. All right, that's good. And now let's add a Pyro source. Okay, great. We need to click here and we're gonna initiate smoke source. And this will create a density and a temperature field for us. Particle separation, I don't wanna have a very high resolution dust. So let's do something like 0.3 perhaps. And I think that should be good enough. Okay. Let's maybe add a little bit of noise. That's always good. Attribute noise. There you go. By default, this is pointing to the color. So I don't want to point to the color. I want to point to the parameters that I created here, the attributes that I created here, which is density and temperature. So let's type here density and temperature. Actually, we're not going to be using temperature, only density, but that's fine. And maybe let's give it a little bit a bigger size. There you go. So if we take a look at the density, that's basically how this looks like. All right. What else do I want to do here? Well, now I want to rasterize this because this is supposed to be smoke. So let's do a volume rasterize attributes. Okay. The values or the attributes that I want to rasterize are density, temperature, and velocity. Okay. There you go. And now we get some kind of smoke here. The particle size, so we use here 0.3. So let's use the same, copy parameters and paste relative reference here, paste relative reference. And this will be a little bit higher resolution, still quite low res, but again, this is going to be very, very subtle. And we need velocity blur, otherwise we wouldn't get any motion blur later. Okay, and normalize by clamped coverage. There you go. So we get rid of some artifacts here and there. So let's see how this looks. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's going to be mostly visible on the bottom because it's more dense, and that's actually what I want, right? So that's all good. So let's add a null here, and this would be our out dust source. Okay, great. All right, that wasn't that hard. Okay, let's go up. And now let's go to the first frame. And now we need to do the simulation for this. So let's create another DOP network. And this would be the dust sim. All right, and let's go inside and let's prep everything here. What do we need? Well, we need a smoke object sparse. That's the first thing that we need. And we need a volume source. Okay, what else do we need? We need a pyro solver sparse. There you go. And this one goes here. And this one goes here. And this one goes there. Let's add a merge because we need some colliders as well, right? Let's configure the volume source. So the volume source, it's basically what we just created. So let's go here. Let's go to dust source and let's bring this guy. Okay. Let's enlarge fields to contain source so we can expand the container. And then we need to add some attributes here, right? So let's add the first attribute here, and this would be the density, and the target field will be also the density. There you go. And this is the scale of the density. I don't know, and we're going to be tweaking this later in LookDev anyway. So let's put 10. I don't think we need more than that. Let's add the temperature now. And the density is adding, the temperature should be basically pulling, right? There you go. And finally, we need also the velocity. And by the way, let's just add the velocity here. So the velocity, it is a vector, right? So that would be velocity. I think that's all we need here. Let's play this and see what happens. Okay, there you go. So now we get some of the smoke. It's very low res, but again, I don't really care. It's gonna be just like an extra layer to add a few things here and there. All right, maybe we got too crazy with the density. I think this is too dense, but we're gonna change it later anyway. But this is working. Okay, that's all that I wanted to check. Let's stop it, go back to the first frame, because we still need the ship and the terrain, right? We can actually copy it from the grain simulation. So we can take the ground and the ship. I'm gonna copy that. Go here, paste it, there you go. We can merge it, and this doesn't need to interact with everything. So this doesn't have to be mutual, but we need to put this merge on top so it goes from left to right. Okay, and that should do it. Okay, all right, so let's create another geometry, and this would be the render. So that would be dust render. Let's create a DOP import fields. Okay, and this should be the dust simulation. There you go. And this should be the dust simulation, and this should be the smoke object sparse. What is it? A dust simulation, smoke object sparse. There you go. And we want to import only the density. Okay. That should do it. Well, let's import everything, even if we don't use, I mean, we need the velocity, of course. I don't think we're going to use the temperature, but why not? And the velocity. There you go. Let's add here a pyro post process, and this is mostly for caching purposes, right? Because here we can say convert to 16-bit float, convert to BDB, and then yeah, that's everything that we need, right? We don't need to do anything here. Not really. Okay, that's all good. Let's use a file cache. And I'm going to cache this, and I'll come back in a second. Okay, this is cached. So if we take a look here, this looks a little bit funky, but we can always add a volume visualization here. And there you go. Definitely well, this top looks a little bit weird. We could fix that with some noises. But it's going to be very subtle, so I don't think we're going to see it like that. Definitely the density should be way lower than that. Something like this. There you go. I think this will blend well with everything else. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so let's add a null, and this would be the dust render, and this is what we're going to take to lobs to render later. Okay, right. So let's set this one to be blue as well. So this is going to be rendered. This is going to be rendered. This is going to be rendered. We need to do something else here. But that's for the rendering chapter. And this is going to be rendered, and this is going to be rendered. Okay. So we're ready to go. And the next thing that we need to do is lighting, look dev, and rendering this whole thing. All right, so let's render all of this now. I made a quick flipbook. I think it's over here. And this is how it looks. So it looks quite nice if you ask me. The smoke on the top looks a little bit weird. You know, I could spend a little bit more time fixing that, but I don't think it's going to be very visible in the render anyway, because I'm going to play this down quite a lot in terms of density. I want this to look very, very subtle. So I don't think we're going to see it much. We might see it maybe when it dissipates, like here a little bit more. But this, this mushroom in the top, we're not going to see that definitely. So it's not a big thing, but we could just break it with some noise or something. But this is how it looks. So let's see if we can make this render look a little bit better now. So everything is ready here. So the first thing that I want to do though is I want to control my grains, right? So if I enable grains here, there you go. And actually I'm going to disable the dust for a minute. So let me go to the grains render. There you go. So at the moment, all the grains have the same scale, which is probably fine for this shot, but I'm going to introduce a little bit of variation to that. And this is something that is going to happen at render time, right? But we can do it here with a little bit of wrangling and with a little bit of Vex, and it would be ready to go, right? So let me add point wrangler here. Actually, I'm going to remove this guy and I'm going to put it there because this is what we're taking to lobs. So what I want to do here, I'm gonna, as you know, grains use p-scale. So let's use that. So that would be float p-scale. And now, at the moment, this is set to, I don't know, I think like a 0.01. That's the default that Houdini is using. So I'm going to use some kind of range between 0.01 and maybe something smaller like 0.005. So let's do that. And it's very simple. We can just use another fit01 and we can randomize based on the ID of each of those grains. And then let's create a channel float and we can create a control that is a minimum and another control, another channel float that is a maximum. All right, that should do it. Okay, let's create those. And at the moment we don't see anything because it's at 0 and 0, right? So if we set here 1, now they would be between 0 and 1, which obviously doesn't make sense. So the maximum that we had before is 0.01. So let's use that. And the minimum, let's use, if we do 0.01, this is what we had before. So let's do 0.001, something like that. Let's see how that looks. Okay, and that seems to be, it looks a little bit smaller actually. So let's bump it up a little bit. Maybe do 0.025 and 0.02, something like that. So now we have a little bit of variation. Some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger, but roughly they are kind of the same. Maybe we can go even lower here. Yeah, that looks a little bit weak because we don't have that many particles. So let's keep it a little bit bigger. Just a little bit of variation. Okay, great. Then what about the color? So for the color, I'm going to use the same texture that I'm going to use for the ground. So they blend together very well because it's the same material basically. So we need to do that. But obviously, let's go to the first frame. To apply a texture to something that is moving, we need to use a rest pose. So to do that, let's use a time shift based on the very first frame, right? So let's put it here. Let's get rid of that. So, we're using only the very first frame. And now I'm going to use an attribute from map. Oops, there you go. So now this gives us a color, and this color, again, because we're using a rest pose, is not going to slide. It's going to stick to the particles. And I have a texture here that I'm going to use later as well. So I'm going to paste it there, and that is a soil texture that looks like that. So it has a little bit of variation, and it has a little bit of everything. So I guess I can show you that here. So if I go to jobs, texture, soil mulch, this is the one. So basically this is just this texture. This is a Megascans material. It looks like that. This is what I'm gonna be using for the ground itself. So that's how it looks. Okay, great. And I'm going to duplicate this one as well. And this one, I'm going to map it to the roughness. So instead of CD, I'm going to use roughness here. And I'm going to use the roughness texture. Okay. So let's put that one there. And that would be the roughness. There you go. The roughness. Okay. Great. So this is mapped to CD. This is mapped to the roughness. Okay. We don't need to visualize it if you don't want to. So we actually see the color, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now here I'm gonna transfer this rest pose to my animation. So I'm gonna do an attribute copy. And I'm going to connect this one here, that one there, this one here. And I want to transfer the CD. I want to transfer the UV attribute, and I want to transfer the roughness attribute that we just created. Okay. And that should be it. So if we take a look through the camera and we go to another frame, we should be getting this, and this is not sliding. There you go. So as you can see, things are sticking into the right place because we use this rest pose. All right. Cool. Let's go to frame 72 and we can use this for looked at. All right, let me save the scene. And I believe that's everything we need to do here. Now we can jump into lobs. So I'm gonna go to Solaris, and here I'm gonna go to stage. All right. So let me create a primitive here. And in this primitive, I'm just going to, configure my shot. If you don't know much about Solaris, if you don't know much about USD, I have a very long series. I think it's 20 hours where I cover pretty much everything about USD and Solaris. So take a look at that. But basically, I'm establishing the structure of my shot. So I'm going to call this shot 1. I'm going to create another context for the geometry, another context for effects, and another context for material. So here is my my structure now. Okay. Cool. Next, I'm gonna create a sub import, which I'm gonna call ship, and I'm gonna bring my ship, and that should be ship geometry. There you go. Let me also import my camera. So, oops, not that, but camera import. Okay. Let's call this one, let's call it camera. There you go. And now here we should have our camera. So this is all working. Great. Okay. Maybe here I'm going to create another context for my cameras as well. I'm going to call this cam. And now this one, let me just copy this context, copy path, and let's paste it there. All right. So we should have our camera in the right place. Okay, great. The ship, this is going to be in the geo context. All right. So now everything is okay there. Okay, great. And let's bring the grains now. So another, I can actually duplicate this one, call this one grains. Gonna put it here. This should be in FX. And I'm gonna point to my grains. So where are my grains? Grains render out. Where is my null? I guess I forgot to add the null. Grains render. Oh, that's the wrong name. Anyway, let's use that name. Stage, and it was called grains out dust. Okay, sorry about the naming, but okay, there we go. So let's go to frame 72. I like this one. All right, good. Let me save the scene. Let's do another one. Now we need a ground. So let's put this one here. Let's call this one ground. This one should be in geometry, and that should be the ground. Okay, out render. There you go. That is the ground. We also need the tunnel. So that's going to be called tunnel. And now we select the tunnel. Great. And if we hide the ground for a second, we can see the tunnel is there. That's where the ship is coming out. All right, good. What else are we missing? Well, we're missing the rocks, right? So let's put this one here. Let's call this one rocks, and let's point to the rocks. So that will be rocks rendered out. Okay, there you go. So now we get the rocks as well. Okay, and we're finally missing just the dust. So let's put this one here. Let's call this one dust, and this one should go in FX, right? FX. And now let me pick the dust. Dust render. There you go. The dust obviously is very slow to render. Volumetric effects are the most render time consuming elements that you can render in effects. So for now, I'm just going to disable it. And we'll take care of that a little bit later. And same thing for the grains, and same thing for the ground. Let's go one by one. So let's start with let's start just with the ship for now. So I'm going to disable everything, and then we need to create the materials, right? So I'm just going to copy from my scene the materials, because that's a little bit time consuming and it doesn't really make sense to go through everything. I will explain that to you in a minute. Let me make sure that my materials are assigned. So my ship is here, shot 1, geometry ship. That should be working. Okay, let's take a look at the materials in a minute. And what else do we need here? And we need some kind of lighting, which I have here. And this light is just an HDRI from Polyhaven. And I'm just piping the texture here. That's an overcast soil 4K, and I'm using an exposure of 0.5, and that's it. The rest is default. All right, cool. Let me add some Karma render settings. Let's use our camera here. Let's set this one to HD. I want to use XPU. All right, I want to go down in the samples, something like 32. What else do I want to do? Well, I probably want to increase the volume limit, because right now it's 0. So let's increase it to something like 2. This is going to make the render slower, but I don't want to go higher because it will make the render very slow. And make sure that depth of field and motion blur is enabled. And we also need velocity blur, right? We also need velocity blur for the particles. Also, we're going to need motion blur, because remember from USD, from my USD classes, unless you cache all of these to USD layers, you're not going to get motion blur. So you need to add motion blur. It's obviously slower, so it's better to cache everything to disk, but we're not doing that today. We just need to assign the camera here, and now we should get motion blur. Okay, only obviously when looking through the camera. All right. What else do I want to do here? I want to add a little bit of so let me look through the camera. I'm going to lock it. And now when looking through the camera, we actually need a camera edit for that. Sorry. So let me just go here. I'm going to add a camera edit, because I want to tweak the depth of field of my camera. So with this selected, I'm going to hit enter. Actually, I might need to assign the camera first. Okay, and now I'm gonna press Shift F, and now I can select my focus plane. So I'm gonna focus on this area over here. There you go. So if I go to sampling, as you can see now, setting my focus distance. So I'm gonna set it to something like that, 47, 48, something like that, and I want to have a strong motion blur, so I'm going to change the shutter a little bit as well to have a little bit more motion blur because the movement is very linear. So I'm gonna do 0.5 minus 0.5 and 0.5, and then the f-stop at 0 it wouldn't get any depth of field. So I'm gonna increase it a little bit to 0.08, something like that, and let's see what we get. Render XPU, make sure we're rendering with aces. All right, and this is our spaceship. Great. If we take a look at the material for the spaceship, ship material, fairly straightforward. These are just PBR textures that I will send to you as well. So basically, it's just the base color, the roughness, the metallic. I have a normal map and I have a displacement map. I just made these quickly in Substance Painter. Okay, great, cool. So now we have the spaceship. Let's go to the rocks as well. Let's enable the rocks here. So where are the rocks? Here. I'm going to enable the rocks. Right. And as you can see, it takes a little bit to compute. That is because of the motion blur, right? So again, unless you cache all of these to disk, you need to compute the motion blur every single frame. So it takes a while. Okay, so the material, as you can see, is already assigned because I have my library and my assigned material here. This is just, just to speed up things, but basically just creating the materials, which is basically just attaching the textures, right? These are just PBR materials. I'm not really doing any shading work here, just attaching the materials, and then assigning the materials here. You know how to do this already. If we take a look at the rocks, so I have 3 different rocks, so each of them have a different material. And again, diffuse color, roughness, and normal map. That's everything, right? Let's take a look at that. There you go. And these are the textures for the rocks. So as you can see, they blend quite well with the terrain. There is no terrain here. This is just the backdrop HDRI, but they look like they could be there. So that's pretty good. And the ones that are flying around, they look nice as well, right? Great. Let's enable now the ground. Again, it is computing motion blur. There you go. That's the ground, and we can enable the tunnel as well. I believe at the end I'm using exactly the same material for the ground and the tunnel, or maybe I tweaked a little bit the tunnel to be a little bit brighter, but it's the same textures and everything, right? What's going on? Okay, yeah, that's all good. Cool. So let's take a look at the ground material, which is very simple. Where is my ground? Here. So the ground, it's same thing. It's a base color, the one that I showed you before, a roughness, and a displacement map. Okay. The only thing is that I'm using a triplanar projection. So I'm using a triplanar projection, and I'm controlling the triplanar scale with these 3 nodes. So basically, I've shown you how to do this already in previous videos. That's what I'm not doing it from scratch. But basically, the way to control the scale of a triplanar projection is by adding a material X position connected to a material X add, and then a material X multiply. And here is where you control the scale in 3 axes. And as you can see, I have them linked. So I'm using the same scale in all axes. And then you connect that to the position of the albedo, the roughness, and the displacement. For the displacement, I'm just adding a subtract here to 0.5 because that's the midpoint that some of the Quixel assets, because it's a little bit of a mess of all the Quixel assets, but in this one, the midpoint is 0.5, and the strength of my displacement is 8 because I want to make it quite bumpy, right? So, and for the tunnel, I'm using exactly the same, but I'm just color correcting a little bit this thing, the albedo, and I believe that I have less strength in the tunnel because we added noise with a mountain noise in subs, and maybe I tweaked the scale a little bit as well, so to make it bigger. All right, cool. So that's it. So if we take a look at these, takes a little bit more, obviously, because of the displacement shader, but it shouldn't be too crazy. Let's wait a couple of seconds. There you go. All right, so that's how it looks. And as you can see, it looks quite bumpy, quite nice, a lot of detail, and it blends very well with the stones, and that is quite nice. Okay. Yeah, it looks quite nice. The tunnel, as you can see, looks a bit too dark, which makes sense because there is no light inside, obviously. But what I've done later in Nuke, because I rendered this with cryptomats, in Nuke I bumped a little bit the diffuse, so it's not that black, right? Because if we increase the exposure, you can see there is detail inside, but it's very hard to see, which is, it's physically correct. But it maybe looks too dark. Also, it's going to be covered with grains anyway, so it's not that visible. All right, great. That all works fine. Let's enable the grains. It's calculating motion blur again. All right, done. So if we take a look at the material for the grains, also very, very simple. Grains, there you go. So what I'm doing is just a normal shader, and what I'm using is a material X geometry that is looking at the color. And because we're exporting the color from subs, because we did an attribute from map, right, and we mapped that to the points, it's picking up that color automatically. And same thing here with a material X geometry property value, and I'm pointing to the roughness that we also created in subs, right? So that all makes sense. So that's it, basically. And then I'm adding a color correction where I'm tweaking a little bit the gamma here and a little bit the gamma there to make it look to my taste. That's it. No displacement, no anything, right? As simple as that. So if we take a look at how that looks like, the whole idea here is that it blends well with the rest of the environment, basically, with the stones and with the ground. That's the whole deal here. There you go. Karma renders the particles quite fast, the grains, but the volumes are very expensive to render. Okay, but the grains render very well. And same thing, sometimes they look a little bit darker than the soil, than the terrain. That's fine. Sometimes when it's sitting on top, the first frames, it actually looks very well, but then it looks a little bit darker, which is fine. But same thing, I'm rendering cryptomats here, so don't spend time in 3D when it's very easy to tweak later in Nuke to make it blend even better. But as you can see, it looks very nice, actually, right? If we go to a later frame, like 96, let's see how that looks. It's evaluating as you can see here, the motion blur again. It needs to evaluate framing and all of that. So yeah, what I suggest is just to write everything to a USD layer, and that would be probably faster. But yeah, let's wait for that 96 frame and see what we get. There you go. So here we have very few particles in the air. Most of them are already accumulated here, and as you can see, they blend very well. So this is working quite nicely. All right, great. And finally, we have the dust. Let's enable that. And the dust is very expensive. So the first frames where we don't have much dust, it goes, yeah, fast or fast enough. But the last frames, like here, we have a lot of dust, is actually very slow to render. Karma is not great with volumes. And to be fair, every render, it doesn't matter which render you use, is gonna struggle with volumetric effects. But yeah, where is the dust? I'm not sure if I assigned this properly. Yeah, I didn't. The dust is here, so let me put that there. And yeah, every time you make a change, it computes again the motion blur. That is expected. But you know, when you're look diving, this is basically how you work. You don't want to write everything to USD layers unless it's very painful, which in this case, it might be a little bit painful. All right, that's good. So the material for the dust, as you can see here, is just a Karma Pyro shader. That's it. And I'm just giving it a little bit of a brownish color, and the density is very low. It's 0.01. That's everything that I've done. And again, everything has CryptoMatte, so it's very easy to tweak later in Nuke. So the only thing that I've done in Nuke is, yeah, just to, with CryptoMattes, tweak a little bit using color corrections, all the elements to make them look, to make them blend even better. But as you can see here, it's blending very well. And I think I even reduced the opacity of the dust in Nuke even more, because it was too much for my test. I wanted to play it very subtle. There you go. It is rendering. So here, obviously, the only place where you're gonna see it is mostly on the bottom, which is actually what I want, which is the interaction. Like when the soil is falling, it's generating a little bit of dust here. And as you can see, it's very slow now, right? So be careful with that, because it's gonna take quite a while for you to render volumes with Karma. Yeah, I don't think it's worth waiting for this. I mean, this will take like an hour or even more. Yeah, this will take like an hour and a half. So, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can see it here in the bottom. I'm gonna kill the render because I don't want to make you wait for that. But that's basically what I've done. So as you can see, very simple setup. Again, I would suggest to write every single of these independently to USD, just by using a USD ROP, write them individually. The lights, the materials, and everything. So at the end, you concatenate only 4 USD layers, send it to the render, and that's pretty much it. But that's basically what I've done here. So if you want to take a look at the final result, if I go here, Houdini, render, no, sorry, scripts, render, and I believe it's, is it this? No, this was a work in progress, just like with a gray shader. So you can see it works very nicely. But this one, right? So yeah, it works very nicely. The smoke on the top is a little bit weird, I know. I should have fixed that, but anyway, I didn't want to, considering how long this thing takes to render the volume, I'm just okay with that. You know, I just show you the technique and that should be fine. But I'm very happy with the integration of the grains with the rest of the soil, the rest of the ground, and obviously the interaction of grains, dust, and stones. I think is looking pretty decently. To be honest, what I would like to do or with this, or what I would have liked to do with this, is to have way more particles. But again, I didn't have the time to reseam everything, but I would like to have at least 3 times more particles, because at the end it looks a little bit naked. It could have more, but yeah, I'm gonna keep it like this for now. But the chunks, you know, the bigger chunks, the smaller chunks, and all of that, I think it looks quite nice for something that didn't take that long to make. And this was just like a first version of everything, right? I didn't iterate on any of this stuff. So yeah, this is basically how it looks, and hopefully, you know, it was worth watching this video. And as usual, thank you very much for being a subscriber of my Patreon. please hit me in the comments if you have any questions or anything. And otherwise, I will see you in the next episode. Thank you very much and have a good day.